Good evening, 79. Tonight I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about a subject that could probably be headed as leadership, management, perhaps just common sense. But I think these are all things that you need to hear at least one more time before you leave the Naval Academy here in 57 days. I'm going to talk in specifics tonight in certain instances, tell you some sea stories. But I hope what you'll try to take away from this lecture is not the specific, but rather the general area that it represents, and try to learn a lesson from it that you can apply to many different situations. I hope that everything I have to say applies to you, whether you are going to be a Marine or an naval air guy or a surface Navy fella or, heaven forbid, a submariner. So with that in mind, let me say that a few things I'm going to say you've never heard before. A few of those things. Some of the things you've heard a lot of times, but I think I might be able to come at you perhaps from a different perspective. And it's always good to reinforce some of the things I'm talking about. Let's start out all on the same foot by saying this. What's going to be your position the first day you report on board your ship or your command? And I'm sure that you all have wrestled with that thought for 4 years. And I think that's a good place for us to start tonight. And the easiest way for us to do that, I think, will be to talk a little bit about my first day. So, if you will, come back with me in history. June the 20th, 1958. Don't anybody say that's before I was born, please. I arrived out there in Pearl Harbor at Hickam Air Force Base. I was very lucky. Found a first class that owned a pickup truck. He took me over to the naval station and way out to a place called Westlock, where my ship was at the ammunition pier all by itself. I was wearing my brand new uniform, service dress khaki. We don't have that anymore. And I had sweat pumps and fast speed. I was one nervous ensign of the line. I walked on board that quarterdeck, presented myself as best I could remember how, and the officer of the deck said, "Go up and see the exec. He's waiting for you." Well, I walked up there and met him, a fine, fine officer, great big heavy fellow named Jim Collier, super officer. And after a fine greeting, he said to me, "By the power invested in me, by that old guy that sleeps up there in the sea cabin, you are now the M Division officer." Hell, I didn't know what M Division was. But I found out the next morning in bare hard facts. I was standing forward of Mount 32, back there on a fantail, facing 85 boiler tenders and machinist mates. Picture in your mind, if you will, a guy that with brand new khakis with the creases from the cardboard still in them, price tags hanging, scared to death. And look at me, if you would, through the eyes of one of those poor ragats standing there in the ranks. Think about what went through his mind. What did he think about? Think about him in the morning when he shaves. And let's just pick one of them at random. Let's pick a first class. I had 4 first class. A first class petty officer is a guy with about 12, 13 years in the Navy. A machinist mate means he probably had 8, 10 years of that at sea. In the morning when he looks himself in the eye as he shaves, he says to himself, "I am a professional, dedicated, career petty officer, very proud of what I do. Proud of my ship, proud of my job, proud of the Navy, proud of this country." And my situation is sort of this. Most of my classmates who are fixing TVs and working out in the public sector are making more money than I am. They don't stand 1 and 3 watches all night long and then work on busted pumps when they get off watch. They don't deploy and leave their families. They're home every weekend playing golf. I live in a compartment on that ship with 40 people that civilians would tell you is room for 3. I spend a lot of time away from my family, and I work very hard. But nonetheless, I'm very, very proud of what I do. The question that I'd like for you all to address to yourself tonight is, how can he retain that pride? How can he be proud of that situation? Especially when he adds to that, and you know, after 13 years in the Navy, that young pissant Darby is my boss. And he's really my boss. He calls the shots. He writes the piece of paper that not only says whether I'll be promoted to chief, but whether I'll even be allowed to take the exam. He tells me when I work and when I can go home. That's my Navy career that he controls. My Navy career is my pay, whether I can send my kids to college, whether I can live in a better house, whether I can buy my wife a new dress. He's got me right here. Even within the rules and regulations of the Navy, he has tremendous clout and power over me. And he's got 13 days in the Navy, and I've got 13 years. Ask yourself how he can retain pride in his situation. We could explore various alternatives, but I think you all know the answer very well. He can be proud of what he does because he's very proud of his country. He's proud of his ship. He believes in what he's doing. But the ingredient that you have the greatest impact on, and that is pivotal in his decision to remain in the Navy or to get out, is whether or not he can be proud of you. Proud of you in the fullest sense. See in you everything that he holds dear in human character. Consider his position if he can't. Consider his position if he feels that you're not playing with all the cards face up. That if his welfare and the mission of that ship or anything were at odds with your personal conveniences, your personal desires or ambitions, that you might pick for selfish motives in any case. That you might do less than your duty in any situation. He has to extrapolate that to what happens when my welfare and what he wants to do come at odds. He'd have to be the fool of the first magnitude to stay in the Navy under those conditions. So above all else, he looks to you to be a guy with total and complete integrity. He doesn't ask for any favoritism. All he asks for is a fair shake under all circumstances. And he has every right to expect that and get it. He certainly expects you to be technically competent to do your job, but not right away. And that sort of brings us to the next side of that coin. As that brand new ensign standing on board the ship, the commanding officer looks down and he sees you, and what does he want from you? What does he expect? Does he expect a great ship handler? Nope. He knows you're not going to be a great ship handler. And the first time that you do a man overboard drill, and as you approach the dummy in the water, and you say back 1/3, back 2/3, back full, back emergency, and you pass this dummy doing 6 knots, about $5 will be exchanged between the captain and the exec. Say, I told you he didn't know that you couldn't stop 8,000 tons by back in 1/3. And they'll give you slack and time to grow technologically. Time to learn your propulsion plan. Time to earn your operation space. They'll expect you to have the basic competence, certainly. But what is he really looking for? Let me tell you how to scare the commanding officer to death. The first time that he asks you a hard question and you know that you've done wrong, that you failed to do your duty or failed to carry out an order the way that was expected to, and you do a little tap dance. You try to make some excuses. You try to beat around the bush and sort of fend it off and make yourself come out a little cleaner than you ought to be. Whether just standing up and saying, I didn't do it right, or owning up to the facts as they are. That's how you can scare the commanding officer to death. Why? Picture what goes through his mind. I put that guy on the bridge of the ship at night, and he makes an error, and he's going to make errors. No question about that. But instead of calling me, where he knows that I might growl at him, he tries to extract himself. And he tries, and he tries, and he tries, until he's in the jaws of collision or some other calamity, and then he calls me, and all the options except prayer have vanished. That's what worries skippers. That's a guy who loses a page out of a classified pub, and rather than right away coming and reporting it so they can handle a thing in a proper and official manner, hangs on and looks for it and hopes against hope. And the next thing you know, there's a full-blown investigation going on and a big flap. So what he's looking for in you is total and complete honesty, complete integrity. And that, as you very well know, is the main thrust, the only real thrust of why we have stressed that to you so strongly for these last 4 years. And it's not the things you do when people are necessarily going to catch you that are such an important part of your training here. It's those things you do when nobody has the foggiest idea whether you did it or not. Those are the things that are very important. That's the guy that's closing out a missile, and he's got a long check-off list that he has to go through because he's opened that missile. And all he's done is just gone in there and checked one little connector. and he's dead tired, and he's ready to get out of there in a hurry. And so his tendency is to sort of check that thing off because he knows that nothing was jimmied in there and sign it. And you know the chances are 9,900 to 1 that he'll get away with that. The problem is the risk in that other time. The guy who does the reactor pre-critical checkoff or some major checkoff back there because he's done some little minor adjustment and he knows it's not important, and so he short-circuits that. That guy will ultimately cause a disaster. More importantly, the troopers see that, and the effect on them and their morale and their respect for the officers and their willingness to adhere by the same rules is significantly diminished. The skipper is looking for a man that's honest, upfront, all the cards on the table, face up all the time. He has to make that decision with very little, just a quick view of you. So you have to make a good impression right off the bat. Remember that. I've looked for some words in my limited vocabulary to sort of put down the next thing I want to talk about. But I guess the easiest words I can find that come closest to it are a guy that's involved and that's dedicated. What do I mean by that? Your commanding officer expects for you to put yourself and your heart into your work. Sometimes you see a junior officer that is nothing more than a messenger between the chief and his department head. Hey, the chief says the main engines are crapped out and we're going to have to work for the next 48 hours to get them fixed. What that department head wants to see and what the commanding officer wants to see is you die a little when that happens to your people. And when you come back and you report that they're fixed and you're ready to answer bells, that you're so blasted enthusiastic and so happy that you can't contain yourself. That's what they want to see. A guy with a little zip, a guy who's got himself personally involved in his work. Very frequently, people, it's only an impression, and after you know them better, you find that they really are involved, and that little smile is just a smile of uncertainty. But be sure that when you're doing your work, that you never create the impression in anybody that you are not wholly involved in your work. The next thing I've got down here, and I'm going to jump around a bit now because I want to go fast, is entitled, How to Succeed in the Navy by Really Trying. First thing I want to talk about is projects. When you first get on board a ship, you're going to get a project. No piece of work that you do in your naval career will be more important to your well-being in the Navy than that first one, even if it's something that's very minor or insignificant in your mind. In my case, redo the ship's phone book. Go around and get that thing squared away so that when I dial 63, I really do get the log room, as it says in there, and not the first lieutenant. All right? Dig in and work hard. The troopers want to see in you great effort. They want to see in you great potential. You're a question mark to them. Your fellow officers want to see in you a guy that's going to be a digger, a go-getter, a shaker and a mover, a fellow who it's worth them putting a lot of their effort into because it's going to pay back to them in the form of a fine watchstander and a real contributor in the wardroom. If there was ever a project you dug into hard, make that first one it. And then when you're going 900 miles an hour working on that project, and you make some errors, and you're going to, hey, people will sort of look at you with rose-colored glasses. And they'll say, you know, yeah, he's making mistakes, but nice, that pissant's going 900 miles an hour. He's bound to do that, you know? And that's good, all right? I want to talk to you briefly about personal appearance. How much do we talk about that here? All the time. You get inspected all the time. Why all these inspections? Why all the emphasis here? Is it because it's nice to look nice? No, not at all. It's because it's fundamental to the business of protecting the United States of America. Now you might say to me, what on earth difference does it make to the protection of the United States if I have shiny shoes and a fresh haircut? And let me tell you, the answer to that is significant difference. I can tell you that the Marines have known this since they were founded. And so if you're going to be a Marine, you can turn me off for a few minutes and I'll talk to the Navy folks, because they know this lesson very well. We have 3 jobs in the Navy. Well, 2. We put it into 2 jobs. To protect this country if the situation calls for it. Heaven forbid. But if that's 10 on a scale of 0 to 10 in importance, and it certainly is, I suppose, then easily 9 on that scale is to give the people of this country and the people across the way the impression that we are capable and able to defend this country. Do they go out to sea with us, see that we can shoot a torpedo through a tractor tire at 2 miles or watch shoot a drone out of the sky? No. They judge us and evaluate us on what they see. When they see our sailors walking down the street, when they see our ships coming in and out of port. And for those reasons, it's very important how we do, how we look. A ship can have every gun out of commission. If it looks great, people say, what a fine, smart fighting unit that is. An SSBN can go to sea, and if it's all black and shiny, the crew is all up there to maneuver and watch, the masts and antennas are all down, and it's maneuvered smartly out of port, everybody says, what a potent deterrent. Hell, you could have wooden missiles in the holes. You know, wouldn't make any difference. Much better to deter war than to fight one. In our business, it's important to always remember that. All right? Now, personal appearance then is important. The appearance of your ship is important. And it's not something the captain does to impress the commodore. It's fundamental to our business. Now, put yourself in the position of that raghead again. What incentive is there for him to look better than you? Clearly, unless you're the worst hypocrite that ever walked down the pipe, if he looks better than you, you've got to give him a 4-0. If he looks as good as you, you've got to give him a 4-0. Can you see that? You can't say to him, I'm only a 3-2 officer, but I expect you to be a 4-0 sailor. Hey, that doesn't work. You are the example. You are the standard. 4-0 means you meet the best standard. How can you possibly grade a man that looks better than you anything other than 4-0? So he has no incentive to ever look better than you. The fact of the matter is, they'll never look better than you. So 24 hours a day, your example, your personal appearance is the standard. And that doesn't mean that you can do it 6 days a week and rest one day and be 86% efficient. Hey, it doesn't work that way. They're going to be no better than you are probably on the worst day of the week. And you can't say anything to a guy about his shoe shine if you need a shave. It's not a one-for-one thing either. So personal appearance is important. We didn't do too good a job, I think, in some of our past classes along that line. So I pass that on to you. All righty? I'm just going to say this very briefly. When you first get on board your ship, ask questions. A question that you ask that might sound like a dumb question to you the first day is not a dumb question. You can ask any question you want the first day, the first week, the first month. Try asking that same question 6 months later, and you sort of come off as a nerd, you know? You're expected to know those things by then, but you can ask anything you want that first period of time on board there. I've seen a lot of JOs that sort of hang back and say, well, I don't know anything, and I don't want to give the impression I'm a complete dummy, and I really am. And keeping a low profile got me through the Naval Academy. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep it kind of quiet here, and I'll learn all this stuff, and then at the end of some period of time, I'm going to emerge like a butterfly from the chrysalis, and I'll no longer be a worm. Hey, that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. Ask questions. Ask your chief. Hey, chief, how's it normally done? What's the standard procedure we've always followed? You don't have a chief? Ask your first class. Ask your fellow officers. Ask your department head. Don't ask them so many questions they get the impression that you're trying to do that you're getting them to do their job. You're getting them to do your job. Don't do that. But ask questions, and that's good. They'll expect that. Jumping around again some more. Early pitfalls. Early pitfalls. Nicknames. Every ship that's worth a hoot, all the troopers have nicknames. It's part of their acceptance, part of their crew morale, part of their thing. And you can know what those nicknames are even before you go on board. Every guy that's named Campbell is Soupy. Every guy that's named Gibbons is Hoot. Every guy that's got big ears, Wingnut. All right? Or whatever. All right? You get some young fella that bathes and scrubs himself 6 times a day, but he still looks awful. And so his nickname is Dirtball. And maybe that's because of the kind of work he does, because he's sort of on the bottom of the totem pole. He's the guy that spends a lot of time in the bilges. You'll hear that name frequently. People will report things to you. Hey, Dirtball's going to make a coffee run. Anybody want coffee? Hey, Dirtball's going to go back to the ship's office and ask the executive if he's going to get out to plan the day or not, so forth. And perhaps you'll be tempted some night to say to the chief, hey, chief, it's kind of dirty around this watch station. Get Dirtball and a couple of guys to buff this place up. Let me urge you not to do that. You wouldn't use your first name because that destroys your professional relationship with your people. And something you need to recognize is that you need to maintain a professional relationship with your people. That doesn't mean you're a stuffed shirt but it has to be a professional relationship, because the day may come that you'll have to look at that young man and say, you're fired. And that's not easy. But more importantly, if you call that man by his nickname, let me tell you what can happen. With his buddies, the guys he goes out and gets tattooed and gets into fights with on the beach and so forth, hey, that's one thing. But when you call him Dirtball, you could hurt him deeply, because he wants to put you up on a pedestal and respect you, and he wants you to respect him. Who are you? Hey, you're the guy that controls his career. And he wants from you respect, and he wants you to see him as an aspiring young person with potential and so forth. And so he does not want to hear dirtball from you. He may never say a word to you about it. So I urge you not to call your men by their nicknames. Call them by their right and proper title. Seaman Kolodzganowski. All right? Next subject. Drinking with the troops. Soon after you get on board ship, your division, if you're the first lieutenant, your seaman gang will invite you over to the Seaman Club, or your petty officers over to the AC-Doocy Club, or the chiefs over to the Chiefs Club. Hey, come over and have a drink with us this afternoon. Have a beer. If you don't drink, a soda pop. Doesn't matter. Question a lot of young officers wrestle with is, should or should not they go? I urge you to go. By all means, go. I think it'd be rude and improper not to. But when you go, stay for 20 minutes, 40 minutes on the outside, 1 or 2 beers, and then take your leave. It's not necessary for you to stay there all evening long until you're toilet-hugging drunk to prove yourself. Quite the opposite. When you've paid your call, much as when you call in your commanding officer, 20 to 40 minutes, take your leave. They may protest you leaving, but the fact of the matter is they're glad and ready for you to leave. They've proven to you that they're good guys, and you've proven to them that you're not socially sterile, and everybody's happy and you leave, and then they go on about having a really good time in a much more relaxed atmosphere after you leave. So that's my word to you about drinking with the troops. The next subject you guys are all thoroughly versed in, and if I told you what it was, you'd all say, we know about that already. Go on to the next subject. I suspect you don't, and I will tell you before I start this sea story that each and every one of you will violate this principle 6 times in the first 6 weeks on board your ship. The purpose for telling you this is, with this, it'll only be 6 instead of 16, I hope, all right? But let's talk about this for a second. Let's take a suppose. Let us suppose that you're the M Division officer again, all right? And you're walking through your ship, and it's about, the 2nd or 3rd day on board the ship, and you haven't met all your people, and you go down the lower level engine room, and you meet this young fellow down there that really impresses you. 2nd class, he's all buffed up, he looks great. Not only that, his watch detection's all squared away. And he says to you, sir, I want you to know how good it is to have you on board. We have the finest engineering department, the best chief engineer, the best ship, the best skipper, and the best exec. I'm so proud of this ship that I can hardly pop. Well, I'll tell you, this is a great outfit. My life is just perfect. And if you ever need any help down here, boy, I can help you out, because I know this blasted place, every pump and valve. My life is just absolutely, in the Navy, ideal. I'm shipping over for 45 years. In fact, the only thing that keeps my life from being perfect is that I want to be a welder. Now, I've got all these books here. I know all about tungsten inert gas welding. I know about sill brazing. I've studied this book on heliarc welding. I've studied all these books. And I know the chief up at the school, and he says that if I can get a quota to come to that school, he'll work with me personally, and I'll get all the top tickets when I come out of that school. This ship rates a welder. We have an NEC for it. Our welder's been transferred. We don't have a welder. We need one. And I'd like to go to welding school. What I'd like to do when we get in and off this run, instead of going on leave with all my shipmates, is I'd like to take my leave and go to welding school. You think you could help me get a quota? Well, you'd have to be an idiot to turn that man down. Huh? So you say, sure, absolutely. See what I can do. I don't know anything about getting quotas, but I'll get you a damn quota. So you make your way back forward, and the ship scratches his head and say, where do I go from there? So you go to the ship's office and say, hey, yo, do you know anything about getting quotas for welding school? He said, no sweat. Whips out a little form he's got there, whips open his catalog. There it is, 2-week school. Types it up. This will go off tonight. We'll have the quota before we get in. He said, daggum, that's great. Thank you very much. So you go to bed feeling pretty good, right? You have struck a blow for your troopers. Not a big blow, but you feel good about it. In just 2 days on board, you put yourself on a paying basis. Well, that's great. And you have every right to be proud of that. Any guy that's not proud of doing things for his troopers has got to be some kind of a nerd. So, the next morning, you go to quarters. The first thing you notice is wrong is the chief. He sort of looks like that guy in the 7-Eleven commercial that hadn't had his coffee yet. Sort of looks like the wolf man. And so you say, "Good morning, Chief." And he says to you, "Sir?" Now, y'all recognize, as an ensign, when the chief says to you, "Sir," you're about to get your ass chewed out. "Yeah, Chief, what is it?" "Did you tell Jones he could go to welding school?" "Yeah, Chief, I took care of it. Got the quota off last night." "Sir, you should know that I've been after him for 3 weeks to square away those records down there in the log room. And I told him if he didn't get those PMS records and those gauge calibration records squared away, that he not only wasn't going to go to welding school, he's not going to go to Sunday school, and I'm about to haul his fanny up to the captain." What have you done? Chain of command. Uh-oh. Doggone, they told me about that at the Naval Academy. Well, they also told me I was going to make mistakes. No, I ain't going to worry about that all day. With my new book here, my wheel book, you know, those little green books all the ensigns have in their pocket. Do not break the chain of command, especially with the chief. So you put that behind you. Lesson learned, never make that mistake again. Right? Right. Next night. Next night. Down to the lower level engine room again. What you've decided is instead of taking liberty, you're going to get a head start on your qualification. So you're going to trace the auxiliary steam system. So you get your clipboard down there. There it is, AS-35. Goes in the DA tank, and you're drawing this picture. And all of a sudden, you look up that same ladder you just came down, and here comes somebody coming down it. Who in the hell is that? Khakis and shiny shoes and kind of a pot belly and scrambled egg. Oh, my God, it's the captain. "Good evening, sir. Ensign Pissant, at your service." "Huh? Well, good evening. What are you doing down here this late hour, Ensign Pissant?" "Well, sir, I'm just down here trying to qualify." "How's everything going? You're really digging in, aren't you?" "Yes, sir, everything's going fine. We do have this one problem here in the main engines, this knocking sound. But I have plan A, alternate plans B and C, all converging on the problem at the same time. And we'll have a resolution shortly, and nothing to worry about getting underway in the morning, and we'll have that all squared away." He says to you, "Well, that's great. That's super. I'm really proud of the way you're digging in here. You've really impressed me. Good luck to you. Come up and see me on the bridge here in a couple of days." So he goes up the ladder, and you say to yourself, "Hot damn, you know, first go at the captain, and I made a good impression. And there's nothing wrong with that, I'm sure. That's good." Well, you've made an impression on the captain. He goes back to his cabin. Now, something y'all should understand about the captain. He has a nicer cabin than you do. That's a fact. He's got gizmos in there that you don't have. One of the things he's got is a button marked Chief Engineer. And so when he gets back to his cabin, he punches that button. He says, "Hey, Chief, come down and see me for a second." So the Chief Engineer comes in. "Yes, sir." "Hey, Chief, is there something that you'd just care to share with me concerning a problem with my main engines?" You just done it again, all right? The lesson I'm trying to tell you is this. The chain of command to many junior officers is not always that crystal clear. So this is the rule I would give you out of this. Unless you're dealing with your immediate junior or your immediate senior, be very careful. Think. Now, how do we square the situation with go? Let's go back down the engine room with Jones. "Sir, can I go to welding school?" "Sounds to me like you've made a great effort and you deserve every consideration. Put in a chit and we'll see what we can do." Then when the chief gets it, he can write down a few things about the log room PMS records, and you can get together with Jones and the chief and sort of establish a criteria by which he goes to welding school, right, when certain things get done. Or the next night when the captain comes down there and says, "Is anything wrong down here?" By all means, if there's something wrong down there, regardless of who's already been informed, you tell the captain about it. You never hide anything from that man. "Sir, we've got a problem with the main engines. Got a knocking sound in there. I got one idea we're working on, a couple other possibilities. Haven't even had a chance to tell the chief engineer yet. As soon as I've gotten him informed, he'll take a look at the situation, come and give you an intelligent report." And then as soon as the captain hits the top of the ladder, you go just as fast as your little feet will carry you and tell the chief engineer, "We got a knock in the main engines." And not only that, the captain knows about it. All right. Jumping right ahead here. Along the same line. Along the same line. You're still the M Division officer, right? You're walking back through the machinery space, and you notice something you hadn't noticed before. Every blasted vertical surface in this compartment has got some pin-up on it, some Playmate of the Month. And you look at that for a while, and that starts to bug you. So you get the chief back there and say, "Chief, you see all this crap all over the bulkheads? I want this taken down. When these people are back here, I want them thinking about the proper operation of this propulsion plant. I don't want them thinking what about about whatever it is they think about when they're looking at those pictures, all right? You get those things down. What's going to happen? Hey, I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're the guy with the stripe, and the chief understands that, and not only are those pictures going to come down, but in about 15 minutes, there's going to be a working party back there with buckets and scrub things, and they'll take all the residue of the paint off, of the glue off the paint from the tape. And they'll buff the place all up, and the pictures will come down, and you'll say to yourself, "Bad gum, that's just the way the captain told me the Naval Academy would work. You know, I call the shots and things get done. Isn't that great? Scratch that one off." Well, sometimes it doesn't quite work out that way. A month, 2 months later, 2 o'clock in the morning, you're walking back to the engineering spaces, you come back through the machinery space, and you look up here, right on the front of number 5 main coolant pump breaker, the April Playmate of the Month. Something you need to recognize right away. There's an examination in progress. And you are the examinee. Go over and tear it down, right? Don't do that. Go over and you grab the phone, you call control room. "Give me Chief Diaz back here." That's my old chief. "Give me Chief Diaz back here." "Sir, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Chief Diaz has been up all day working hard, and he's got the next watch. Get me Chief Diaz back here." Here he comes. And man, I can tell you what he's going to look like. The Wolf Man. Huh? His khaki shirt tail hanging out, his shoes all untied, his hair all askew, and you come back there and say, "Yes, sir. Can I be of service to you at this hour?" And you'll say to him, "Chief, you recall our conversation of a month ago when I told you that I would like these pictures removed from this place? And I asked you to use your good offices to do that and keep those things down." "Yes, I remember that, sir." "Well, then I would like for you to observe this phenomenon here that I'm looking at. And I'd like to ask you once again to see if you can get that removed and see if you can keep it that way. You think you could do that?" And he'll say, "Yes, sir." He'll go over and take it down, right? He calls a first class in charge of that space. First class will look a great deal like the chief did. "Yeah, Chief, what is it?" And then in words somewhat different than you used, he'll let this young fellow know all the things he's going to do to diminish his lifestyle the next time something like that happens. Will the first class take it down? No. He'll call the second class. Will the second class tear it down? No. He'll get the third class that's in charge of the cleaning the upper level. Will he take it down? No. He'll go looking for the guy missing his April centerfold. All right? Why do I tell you this story? The reason I tell you is this. Was the chief really mad at you? Was the first class mad at the chief? Well, they might not have been thrilled, but let me tell you something. They were tremendously happy. They got professional satisfaction out of the fact that you called them and kept them in the stream of things. You did not bypass them when there was a problem of any kind. That's their professional pride and job satisfaction that you're dealing with there. Fundamental to our business. That's what keeps people in the Navy and working. Put yourself in the same position. There's some problem back in the engineering spaces, you're the main propulsion assistant. The chief engineer calls your chief and they fix it. Your guys fix it in the middle of the night. And you find out about it the next morning at breakfast. What's the only possible thing you can say? What the hell do you need me around here for? That's the way that chief would have felt. That's the way that first class would have felt. The chain of command is very important. Keep it in mind. One of the things that you're going to have to work at when you get on board ship is where you play on the scale of things, if I can borrow a term that Admiral McKee used to like to use. At the one end is the officer that's just one of the guys. The fellow that goes out and drinks with the troops and gets toilet hugging drunk. He's familiar with everybody. He's everybody's pal. Very informal fellow. At the other end of the scale is the stuffed shirt, the cold fish, the guy that holds his troops at arm's length. Nobody ever knows what he's thinking. Nobody ever can really count on what his reaction will be. Aloof, stilted, cold. Where do you play on that scale? One of the things you'll do throughout your Navy career is seek the place that fits your particular style of leadership best. And that's a pretty broad spectrum among outstanding officers. Let me give you what I consider the best advice I can give you, young folks, about where to start out. Be yourself. Be your best self, but be yourself. Don't try to be something you're not. I once served with a very fine officer who was an outstanding officer in every respect. Two ensigns recognized that. This guy had everybody's confidence on board the ship, and their position was, hey, hook your coattails to a rising star. So they started to imitate him. Well, certainly you should borrow from everybody around you their good qualities. But in this case, within 2 weeks, they even had his North Carolina accent down. Be yourself. Be your best self, but just be yourself. That's what your troopers want. Nobody likes somebody that's trying to pretend or be anything other than they really are. Next thing I'm going to talk to you about is entitled, Every Man's Important. And you've heard this many times. Everybody's got to feel important. And everybody says, hey, I know that coming on. Let me tell you about some of the subtle ways you can detect when things aren't that way. One of your sailors, a seaman, maybe a third class, says to you, hey, I'm only a seaman and therefore I don't rate an opinion. Or I'm only a third class and I don't have any say in things around here. Consider that a red flag, a danger signal that you've got basic fundamental problems in your division. Why is that? A couple of good reasons there. Probably more than two, but just a couple of the big ones right off the bat. First of all, none of you are smart enough to run your division without the aid and assistance of every man you've got working hard on the problem. I'm sure you all recognize that. There's not a senior officer in the Navy that doesn't owe his career 12 times over to the fact that his people were thinking when he wasn't. And as I stand here tonight, one of those 12 cases that certainly applies to me, I can tell you that I owe my career lock, stock, and barrel to QM3 Gordon Ober, USS Dace. In 1964, as the officer of the deck, I ordered the ship from 150 to 400 feet. He responded by saying, sir, we'd best ring up flank. And I said, why is that? He says, because according to my chart right here, from about 300 feet on, it's granite. Unless we're making a hell of a lot more speed than you are right now, we ain't going to make it to 400. I tell you that because it's a fact. You need everybody thinking. You need everybody's input. Doesn't mean you have to have a committee meeting to give an order. But you need people thinking about what's going on and giving you their ideas. But more important than that, if a man feels that the only thing he's got to say is whether or not he's hungry, then he really doesn't have much job satisfaction. If he only feels he's a hard hand, how in the world can he take any pride in his work? He needs to feel that if he's got a bitch, somebody's going to listen to him and take action. If he's got an idea, somebody is at least going to give him the courtesy of saying, that's a lousy idea. Or that's a good idea and we can't afford it. Or that's a good idea and we'll give it a go. But you really need that atmosphere on your ship. And when you have that, what you'll find is the troopers saying we and not they all the time. Next thing I want to talk to you about is captain's mast. Whether you like it or not, shortly after you get on board, you're going to have to go to mast with one of your troopers. What is your position at captain's mast? Most certainly, you're going to be a little embarrassed, perhaps downright mad. Not too happy about the fact that you got chewed out by the exec or the captain because one of your guys went over and cleaned out the EM club. So let's take that situation and kind of examine it for a second. You go up there to mast that young fellow, 17, 18 years old, and the captain says, this guy just tore up the EM club, and the CO of the base has told us that we don't want any of our sailors in the club here anymore. And there are 4 guys in the hospital because of his rowdiness. Ensign Pissant, what do you have to say about this man? Boy, I'll tell you. What you say is, this guy is a liability to the world. The chief and I are ready to trade him in for a busted swab. And if given permission, I'll rig the halyards and we'll hang him. And that's the really way you feel. Or words to that effect sort of come out of your mouth. You know, not too good. So the captain puts some penalty on him, some punishment, and he goes back down to his berthing space and he sizes up the situation. The commanding officer, the grand poopah of the whole ship, has just taken his stripe, fined him a lot of his money, restricted him, and more importantly, the guy that controls his destiny, his division officer, the fellow that he looks up to and so hopes will respect him, had just said that he's a liability to the ship. And so he goes through that and adds up the numbers in his mind, and he comes up with the conclusion that there's not anything left for him in the Navy. So the first opportunity he gets, he goes across the brow, and you never see him again. And after 30 days, he's declared a deserter. And all of his things are transferred over to the base. And when and if he's ever caught, the folks that try him will be people he doesn't even know. And in all too many cases, today, the reason for those types of things happening is because some young fella didn't get proper leadership from his officers. Now, let's go back to mast. What is your role there? Certainly, you never say anything that's not true to your commanding officer or anybody else. But one thing your commanding officer understands very well, when you come up there to mast, you're going to come up there fighting for your people. And when you tell the truth, you may be slightly guilty of gilding the lily. All right? What do you think of this man, Ensign Pissant? Sir, I recognize that he has caused several $1,000s worth of damage over there, and that this is the 6th time you've seen him this month, and that he's been quite an embarrassment to command. But I think you should also recognize other things about him, that he has qualities. He's the guy that chipped down all those foundations down there in the engine room, got all that corrosion off of them and preserved them, and it looked so good at that inspection the other day. And he's the guy that keeps all of our records down there on our overhaul maintenance projects. And he does a marvelous job at that, in spite of the fact he's never been to school. And whatever else good you can think to say about him. I like the way he parts his hair. All right? Your commanding officer expects that from you. That's important that you do that. Because let's take a look at what happens then. He goes back down to the compartment. All of his troopers, his shipmates down there waiting for him at the bottom of the ladder. Hey, how'd you make out? Boy, let me tell you, that old man was ready to peel my hide off in 1-inch strips. That young pissant, boy, he went in there and dug for me. Look at here. I still got my stripe, and I got half my pay. He just grew a foot in the eyes of your people. And when you get that call at 3 o'clock in the morning that your guys are in the Tijuana jail, your job is to go down there and get them out. And the honor concept does not apply in the Tijuana jail, all right? You tell them whatever it takes to get them out of jail. This man's running for vice president. All right? But your folks need to know that that's where your heart is, that you're looking out for them, that you're not above putting them on report if the situation calls for it. But having put them on report, you'll go right back up to mast there and tell it like it is for them in the best and most positive way you can. 3 words I want to talk to you about for a second. Reality, perception, and hypocrisy. Those 3 things tied together will bite you and bite you and bite you unless you think about them and conduct your business accordingly. Reality and perception. Certainly on the scale of importance of things, 0 to 10, reality is always 10. Perception in our business is 9. It's of little value that your heart was in the right place while the morale of your troopers went down the tubes. That your heart was in the right place while people got so irritated with the way the ship was being run that they bailed out of the Navy, and you were deprived of a competent petty officer. Or worse. How is that? How can that happen? Let me tell you a quick sea story. One of the first things you want to do when you get on board ship is make friends with the food service people. That's important too, right? So what you have done that. You've got an assembly line between you and the grill at breakfast. Those guys are turning them out, you're consuming them, all right? But with your keen ear that you developed in Bancroft Hall from listening for the OW, you detect the executive officer saying to the captain, I'm going to inspect the forward berthing spaces this morning. If you need me for anything, I'll be down there, sir. Oh, you say, that's where my folks sleep. I'm going to give my guys a head start on the inspection. So you forgo your 9th stack of pancakes, and you whip down there and you grab those young sailors and you say, the exec's coming down here in a few minutes, on kind of a little surprise inspection. Be sure this place gets an extra buff this morning. And you go whipping up the ladder to go stand your watch, saying to yourself, man, I have struck a blow for M Division. I don't want the exec to think for a second that my guys aren't super. that they're not as good as those pork chops that live in the next compartment. I want him to be as proud of them as I am. And I've given him a little edge on his surprise inspection, so they'll look good, and that's great. But the conversation in the compartment as you leave it doesn't sound too much like that. Their comments are, that SOB, that one-eyed Jack, he don't give a damn what we live in down here day to day, but now that the exec is coming, and it might reflect on him, oh boy, we got to clean this joint up. Reality and perception, they don't always coincide. In your business, you have to go to pains sometimes to make sure that they do. All right? Let me tell you some of the things I've seen junior officers do that create those perceptions, or in fact exist, that turn off the troops. They turn off everybody now that you think about it. That's the guy that stands his watch one way in the dark of the night when it's just him in the watch section on the bridge. But when the captain comes out, all of a sudden he's barking orders and he's squaring everybody away and he's running a whole different ball game. That's a guy that we do things one way normally, but on the day there's going to be an inspector on board, he comes to the troops and says, hey, gents, we're not going to do it the way we normally do it. We got this inspector here. We're going to load torpedoes today according to the standard procedures for the submarine force. Or we normally do this, we normally wear this uniform, but today we're going to change to a whole new uniform because the admiral's coming. The sailors, those young folks, may not have ever heard the word hypocrisy, but boy, they sure understand it, and they don't like it, nor should they have to. Let's go back down to that compartment. How do you come at those folks in the right way when you really want to make sure that things match right? You say, hey, you know, the exec's coming down here. I want to make sure that he understands who the best division on this ship is, and I don't want to give him any misinformation or give him an unfortunate view of us that's really not true. So when you buff up this morning, make sure that we look as good as everybody else does around here. Hey, you've just come at that young man from a different direction. That's his personal pride you're talking about. He'll say to you, stand aside, Ensign Pissant. The mobile swab is about to go into action. Huh? All right? Reality and perception. Certainly if the Commodore is coming on board, you're going to do some work to make it look good for him. He rates that. But the way you tell the troops about that is very important. Hypocrisy in its many forms, whether it be real or perceived, is devastating when it exists to the effectiveness of an officer. Be very careful about that. What's good on Monday is good on Wednesday. This business of, hey, let's take down all this stuff off the bulkheads because we're coming into port, because we're going to have ladies on board. Or let's clean up our language, there's ladies on board. That's a bummer. That's hypocrisy. Don't ever be guilty of that. Fight that wherever you find it. Enough on that subject. I'm just going to say this briefly. Make sure that you work hard at getting your folks advanced. Take time out of the workday if you have to. Keep your people on board on the weekends to make sure they get their assignments in. The worst thing that can happen to you, to your men, to your division, to your ship, to the United States Navy, is for your people not to get advanced on the day that they're ready and qualified to do so. Service in the Navy means sacrifice. A certain amount of sacrifice is involved. I can tell each and every one of you folks here that in the civilian job market today, if on May 30th we could put you out there looking for a job, y'all could find jobs where you'll make as much or more money than you're going to make in the Navy. And you wouldn't be standing 1 and 3 watches, or weekend duties, or deploying, or any of those things. But I can tell you where this country desperately needs you. It needs you serving in the fleet, not as a mediocre or fair officer, but as a superb officer, giving great leadership to those young people. At a time when our adversaries are multiplying like fleas on a dog's ear, we need the very best Navy that we can get. We need you folks to serve not 5, but a whole career in the Navy. But regardless of whether you intend to serve 5 years or 35 years, don't ever let that affect the way you perform. I ask you to do this. Serve your Navy and serve your country from the first day as though you plan to spend 50 years in the Navy. Then if you decide to get out, hey, that's fine. But if you are a 5-and-outer, it'll show up in the way you do your business, and you'll fall far short of your potential. And the Navy and your people will suffer for that. There are going to be days when you're going to be willing to sell the farm for a quarter. Days when you're so damn tired you can't keep your knees straight. Days when you're hurt and disappointed. But on balance, it's got to be the most personally and professionally satisfying endeavor that a young man could possibly undertake. And I really envy you because that's ahead of you. You're well prepared for this challenge. It is a challenge, and it'll tax you right down to your limit at times. I wish you all the very best of luck. Good night.